Judge Lyman just read Blake Lively for filth. Hello, and welcome back to The Chanel. I took a little bit of a hiatus, got super busy with life, but I'm very glad to be back, and very glad to be back with some good news. Finally. Now, I do want to preface this by saying I am not a lawyer, I have no legal background, and I'm probably the least qualified person to even be talking about a legal case, but it's my channel, so I'm going to say whatever the fuck I want, and I appreciate you sticking with me. Judge Lyman literally quoted Outkast in his statement. He said, "Roses really smell like boo boo, ooh yeah." And I love that for him. So Judge Lyman dismissed 10 of Blake Lively's 13 claims against Justin Baldoni. The only 3 that are surviving and going to trial are breach of contract, retaliation, and aiding and abetting in retaliation. And even still, Judge Lyman seemed to think that these 3 claims still weren't that strong, but thought that there was enough there to present to a jury. And of course, Blake Lively cherry-picked Judge Lyman's statement. That's actually one of her talents, if you didn't know, and had a crash out on her Instagram stories. It's also so crazy to me how all of the huge Reddit pages about celebrities like FOMOA, Celebrity Legal Drama, I think there are a couple more, all have people in the comments supporting Blake. I'm inclined to believe that these are bots, because where is the mountains of evidence? Blake presented everything she had and had no case, which is why 10 of her claims were thrown out. We're going to go through Judge Lyman's statement and see what exactly he said. Of course, the first one that I want to address is the sexual harassment claims. And Lyman says, "It would be difficult to view Baldoni's conduct as reflecting hostility or bias based on gender. He was acting in the scene. Assuming he was improvising, the conduct was not so far beyond what might reasonably be expected to take place between 2 characters during a slow dancing scene, such that an inference of hostile treatment on the basis of sex would arise. At least in isolation, the conduct was directed to Lively's character rather than to Lively herself. Creative artists, no less than comedy room writers, must have some amount of space to experiment within the bounds of an agreed script without fear of being held liable for sexual harassment." So this tells me a multitude of things. Firstly, Lyman is clearly agreeing that Baldoni's conduct does not indicate gender-based hostility. And even if it did happen, it's within the expected boundaries of acting and the context of the film. Lyman is explicitly protecting Baldoni's behavior as part of creative work. This is a question of what precedent should we be setting? Because if Lyman rules in favor of Lively here, then this would set a legal precedent that actors who are literally taking on a different role from themselves can be accused of SH for taking creative liberty that is consistent with their character and what their character would actually do. And that is towing a very fine line. And in my own silly goose opinion, that would incite chaos in the courts. I also think that that is an insane thing for Blake Lively to claim, given that her entire career is acting. So that would just blacklist her from any future film, because who the would want to work with someone who might potentially sue you for SH for improvising while playing your character? Also, I do want to note that Blake Lively is guilty of this herself. After declaring that she had improvised the scene in A Simple Favor, where she grabs Henry Golding's crotch. There are also multiple examples of this, like how she kept talking about Brandon Sklenar's ass. She's the epitome of a double standard. Lyman also explicitly acknowledges that there could be a very good reason for why Blake was receiving so much negativity in the press that was not related to retaliation. He says, "To be sure, a jury could also find that something other than retaliation explains the actions of the Wayfarer parties. As they argue, they had a legitimate interest in protecting their reputations and the reception of their film against negative press and would have taken steps to do so regardless of Lively's protected activity." So what this reads to me is that there very well could be another explanation, a very reasonable explanation, for what had happened. With Lively going to the New York Times and blasting Justin Baldoni, and in my opinion, making baseless claims with cherry-picked evidence, that would serve as a very legitimate reason for Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties to want to engage in PR to protect their reputations and the reception of the film. Also, I'm sorry, but why the hell would Justin Baldoni want to retaliate against the lead actress of his film that he is trying to profit from? It makes not even a lick of sense. One of the biggest blows to Lively's case is when Lyman addresses the defamation claim. He cites, "A civil action cannot be maintained against any person, firm, or corporation for the publication of a fair and true report of any judicial proceeding, legislative proceeding, or other official proceeding, or for any heading of the report which is a fair and true headnote of the statement published." The fair and true report privilege has been described as an absolute privilege that is not defeated by the presence of malice or bad faith. A report need not be balanced to be fair and true. It is sufficient that the account given is substantially accurate. So from reading this, my understanding is that Judge Lyman is basically telling Lively that you can't file a defamation case just because someone said the truth and you don't like the truth. Because defamation usually means that someone is saying something with negative intent, as well as something that is untrue and knows it to be untrue. I think it's ridiculous that she even tried to sue for defamation, but again, I mean, if you've seen my other videos, you know that I don't believe that Lively expected this to go to court. I think she really thought that Baldoni was just going to cower down and whimper like a little puppy. This next one made me chuckle a little. Lyman says, "Before proceeding further, the court notes that the discussion below treats It Ends With Us movie and Wayfarer both as Lively's employer. Not to suggest that there was an employer-employee relationship, there was not, but to conform to the language of the statute and case law, which use the term employer, even in cases involving independent contractors." So this was something that was very contentious with this case. Lively basically was trying to claim that Wayfarer and It Ends With Us movie were her employers. But Judge Lyman's stance on this is very clear, that Lively definitely was not an employee of either entity, but rather acted as an independent contractor. And what's not helping her case is her PGA letter that she wrote. The remarkable PGA letter where she claimed that she basically produced, directed, and was in charge of a majority of the production because everyone else was incompetent. She also never signed her contract. So very clearly, she is an independent contractor. She cannot be treated as an employee. So of course, after Judge Lyman's statement was released, Blake had to go through and cherry pick quotes that made her look like the victim. She posts on her story a quote where Judge Lyman says, "Lively has come forward with affirmative evidence supporting her claim, both with respect to the Wayfarer parties following through on their intent to spread negative content about her, and with respect to Wallace's technological capabilities in doing so." And the way that she pulls this quote to highlight in her Instagram story is almost as if she's trying to show proof that Judge Lyman agrees that there is proof of retaliation. But of course, this is not the full context. Because after that, he says, "In sum, the parties fiercely dispute the extent to which the backlash against Lively was organic or artificial, and which steps the Wayfarer parties may have taken to protect themselves, versus which ones they might have taken to destroy Lively personally and her career. A jury can and should decide those questions." So Lyman isn't making a judgment here. From what I understand, the reason that this specific claim is going to trial is because Lively did present enough evidence that it's reasonable to have a jury decide a final verdict. But that does not mean that the evidence is good or strong enough to support her claim. It literally, and again, this is just how I'm interpreting it, but it literally just sounds like Lyman is saying, yes, evidence exists. Now the jury has to decide if the evidence is strong enough. She also posts another quote from the ruling that says, "A person in her position could have understood the workplace to at times reflect a gendered and sexualized view of women and a disregard for their privacy, sufficient to make it reasonable to complain about a hostile work environment based on sex or gender." I think the key words in this quote, though, are could and sufficient. It sounds like to me that the court is saying it is very possible that someone might have understood the workplace in the same way that she had, and it's also very possible that someone might not have. And then with the word sufficient, again, not a lawyer, but this is how I'm interpreting it. It sounds like he is saying that if a person in her position could have understood the workplace in the same way that she did, then based on their perception alone and the interpretation of the events that unfolded, that would make it reasonable for her to submit a complaint. But that is also not Judge Lyman saying that the harassment legally happened or that the workplace actually violated the law. But the way that she's highlighted this quote in her Instagram stories make it seem like it's a win for her, when it just frankly is not. The judge's role at this point is not to make a final judgment, because that final judgment is up to the jury. What Judge Lyman is saying, from my understanding, is that Blake Lively has the bare minimum evidence for that claim to go to trial. So while it looks like a win for Lively, she's barely scraping by. And then finally, we have to address her final statement that she signed with a dragon at the very end. Classic. Love that. She says, "The last thing I wanted in my life was a lawsuit, but I brought this case because of the pervasive retaliation I faced and continue to for privately and professionally asking for a safe working environment for myself and others." First off, professional is a crazy claim because nothing she did on that set was professional. But whatever, putting that aside, I thought this case was originally about sexual harassment. No? Suddenly it's now about retaliation? Curious. And listen, I'm not trying to dog on her, but I fundamentally do not see this case as gender-based harassment. I see it as a class war. I firmly believe that Lively never thought that Justin would fight back, and now she's dug herself into this hole that she's just desperately trying to crawl out of. She claimed she had mountains of evidence, but lo and behold, it's nowhere to be found. Or at least there's not enough, which is why 10 of 13 of her claims were thrown out. And it's very crazy to me that nobody from the It Ends With Us cast is saying anything publicly in support of Blake. And perhaps it's because they just want to stay out of the legal drama. But if they fundamentally believed that Blake was a victim here, I find it hard to believe that they would not be supporting her. The only entity that has publicly said anything was her agency, WME. And even then, I'm kind of skeptical about that statement because we know that Ryan threatened Wayfarer to put out a statement and claim responsibility for the backlash that Blake was facing during the promotion of the movie. And we've also seen Ryan's texts, and brother is unhinged. So I really don't think that that's a far-fetched theory. But what do y'all think about all of this? I really do see it as a class war. I think Blake and Ryan really thought that they could buy themselves out of this one, but I'm glad that it doesn't seem to be working in their favor. Well, that's all that I have for you all today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Also, let me know if there is anything I missed, because this document was like 152 pages, something like that. So of course I couldn't go through everything. I just kind of pulled the things that I thought were the most interesting or stood out to me. But let me know if there's anything I missed. Also, let me know if there are any topics that you would like for me to cover. I'm definitely running out of ideas. There are some old things that I wanted to talk about, like Jake Doolittle and his crazy response to all of the content creators who wouldn't support his charity. I've also been working on an Eladia Baldwin video, but for some reason that's been taking me a little bit longer because there's lots of things that I have to compile together. But yeah, I would love to hear from all of you. Alrighty, I will log off for the day, but don't ever forget, roses really do smell like boo-boo. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Leave a comment down below, and maybe check out one of my other videos if you liked this one. And hopefully, I'll see y'all in the next one.